Development at Rutgers University, and we are here today with Kelly Clarida. You want to wave, Kelly, who is one
Hello,
of
everyone.
the coordinators, and Sharon Masso, who's with us as well. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, of course, there's Sharon. You want to wave and say hello, Sharon?
Hi everybody.
I just want to share a few bits of information with you. So, as you know, we have door prizes at all of our events, and we're very grateful for them. My center, or our center, gives away 5 registrations for events, and you can see the names of the individuals who will receive them. And we have BookSource that has given us a take-home resource and literacy pack. That's for Brooke Abrams. Benchmark, an online subscription for our brand new Spot On series, Taylor Garcia. And we have iStation, a gift certificate for use on their website, and Margaret Percy is receiving that. Rosen Classroom, a $50 gift certificate for use on their website, and Kathleen Bentley will receive that. Sundance Newbridge, a gift certificate to use on their website, Joyce Jensen, you can retrieve that. Blue Star Education, a gift certificate to use on website, Christine McKim, you can retrieve that. Alive Studios, a gift certificate on their website, Adrienne Collette. Food Steps to Brilliance, a gift certificate to use on their website, Elisa Lombardo. And the Collaborative Classroom, Capstone Classroom and Mind Play, a gift certificate for Catherine Owens, and Sablier, a gift certificate to use on their website for Julie Della Torre. So thank you to those vendors for their support. Just want to mention, we do have an advisory board, 3 new people, Laura Battonato, Sheila Cooper, Jennifer Stein, and all of our others who have been with us. If you're interested, let us know. We'd love to have you on our board. Our next event will be on Thursday, December 10th, and we have Cornelius Miners speaking about a very current topic. He is a wonderful speaker that you all may know with wonderful books, so please join us for Cornelius. We've arranged for our new spring program, which will be all virtual and webinars. And please go to our website to look for these wonderful speakers, Janet Wong, Lucy Calkins, Tim Rosinski, and David Pearson, Kate Roberts, and John Shoemaker. I'll be looking forward to hearing them as well. As you know, we do coaching in your schools. We even do virtual coaching, so call us for any kind of differentiated instruction you're interested in having us work with you. And the Rutgers Reading Club is for struggling readers and after-school program. And again, we're doing all of this virtually. Also, remember that Rutgers has a reading specialist / supervisor master's program for 33 credits. Please look on the Rutgers website and ask us about it. We'd love to have you as our students. And just before we begin, please remember to turn off your sound. Use the chat function to ask questions. We will send you a link of the recording of the webinar by the end of the week. Again, look at our 2021 programs on our website, and you get a feedback survey for the webinar also, so you can receive your professional development 1 hour. So I don't forget, later, I want to wish you all a lovely, happy Thanksgiving, even if it's very small. Small is not bad. You'll be together with, your family, and that's a good thing. And now, the important part of our day, Donalyn Miller taught upper elementary and middle school students in Dallas-Fort Worth area, was a finalist for the 2011 Texas Elementary Teacher of the Year. In a popular book that we all know, the book Whisperer, Donalyn reflects on her journey to become a reading teacher and describes how she inspires and motivates her middle school students to read 40 or more books a year. In her latest book, Reading in the Wild, Donalyn collects responses from 900 adult readers and uses this information to teach lifelong reading habits to her students. She is the co-founder of Community Blog, the Nerdy Book Club, and co-hosts monthly Twitter chats. Her articles are in many publications such as Education Week, Teacher, Reading Teacher, Educational Leadership. We are thrilled to have you. Thank you so much for coming. And I will stop sharing my screen and give, oh, hello, everybody. Wave, everybody wave before we put up the, good. We put up her PowerPoint. Okay, Donalyn, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with all of you this afternoon, and I want you all to know how much I appreciate all of you who are attending this session live. I know it's difficult to put yourself in front of one more screen, and it speaks so highly of all of you and your commitment to the children that we all serve. My responsibility to you will be to make that time worth it. Thank you so much for joining us. I am from Texas. If my accent doesn't make that clear, it will pretty soon. I live in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, the northeast corner of my state. As I told some members of our group earlier, it is a balmy 75 degrees here today. So I'm sending you as much Texas sunshine as I can possibly send you for the next hour. You are more than welcome to take screenshots of any of my slides. However, I know that we are recording the session for you to be able to review later. And I will also give you a link at the end where you can go back and look at all of the individual slides. So if you missed something, a piece of research or an idea that you didn't get to capture, don't worry, we will back you up with resources later. You can just enjoy your time and enjoy your learning. So let's get started. I hope that you are all doing well today and that you are getting a chance to take care of yourselves. I know that for many of us, we are dedicated to serving young people. We are taking care of families. You are taking care of parents. You are taking care of your community. And when you are in the business of feeding all of those other people, you need to be fed too. I hope you're taking care of yourself, that you're helping yourself set some boundaries, and that you're also taking some time to get as much joy as you possibly can, even in 10 minutes a day. Take care of yourselves. I also want to ask you how your reading life is going. And I can speak from different levels here. You know, my 11-year-old self, if you had told her that she was going to get to spend 8 months in her house with all of her bookshelves and not have to talk to people, she would have been thrilled. But she's actually probably annoyed with me at some level, because I have had more difficulties maintaining and sustaining my reading habit this year than I have previously. And talking to hundreds and hundreds of readers of all sorts of ages, I've found that continuum seems to exist for most of us right now. I see some people who are reading more than they have read in a long time because they've lost many of the opportunities that diverted their attention away from reading, perhaps. Or they finally had an opportunity to tackle that stack of books they've downloaded to their Kindle or that they've stacked on their office floor. But I also meet quite a few readers who are not reading as much. There's a Reading Habits Info is collecting data on the reading habits of readers during the pandemic, during the lockdown. And what they have found is that overall, many people are reporting reading more than they did last year. But we also see reports of people who are finding it challenging to read. And there's some science behind this. You know, when we're flooded with threat messages, both mentally and physically, which we have all been in 2020, flooded with threat messages, we take all of our effort, our physical and mental effort, and we divert it towards that threat, which means that we lose some of our mental flexibility and some of our cognitive energy during times like the pandemic, during times like 2020. And that means we have less cognitive energy for things like reading. It's important for us to be able to do this ourselves as readers, as adults, but also be mindful of how this might be affecting the children that we're working with. You know, I might not be reading as much as I thought I might in a year like 2020, but I know that reading is out there waiting for me somewhere. We can find our way back to reading again and again and again over the course of our lifetimes. And for all of us in this group who enjoy reading, you can probably look back over your reading life and see some times when you were reading a lot and some times when you were reading less. And if you hit a lull in your reading motivation for a period of time, you know it's not permanent. But working with young people, what I have found is that for many of them, especially if their love of reading or their interest in reading for pleasure is burgeoning, if it's just emerging, they hit a setback, they may not realize that it's not permanent. And so one of the best things that we could do as adult reading mentors for the young people in our lives is to help them hold a vision of themselves as readers in the future. Can they see themselves as readers in the future, even if they're not reading very much right now? I've also talked to hundreds of readers and gotten their tips and suggestions on how to maintain and sustain a reading life when your reading motivation might flag. And while these might be useful tips for us during the pandemic, of course, I think these are good tips to have in our toolbox anytime we're working with readers who may strive to maintain their motivation and their interest in reading. Some tips that I've gathered from other readers that might benefit you as a reader too. I have a friend who is an editor, and he spent part of the summer rereading his Star Trek paperbacks that he read when he was in middle school. And talking to him, he said, my brain can't handle one more new thing right now. I want the familiarity of those stories and the epic battle of good versus evil where the good guys triumph in every Star Trek episode was something that he felt like he needed this year. I have another friend who recommends reading lighter books, reading books that are more humorous, I read celebrity biographies sometimes, and I suppose that's my lighter reading. My friend Catherine, who teaches middle school in Illinois, also writes romance novels. And so she has been recommending romance novels to a lot of people this year, and that's what she's been reading. She says, I want my happily ever after ending. Picking something short. This is a tip that I have used that has worked for me. Perhaps you don't feel like you can keep your stamina going for a 500-page epic historical right now. Pick something shorter. Pick a book of short stories and read one short story a day. Pick a poetry anthology, read a few poems, read one chapter in a nonfiction book, or browse the topics that interest you. Over a period of time, a few poems a day, a few short stories a day, we could see how we might finish a complete book. If talking to many young readers, it's also the sitting still and the focusing of their attention because they are more anxious this year. It's harder to sit still and focus. Audiobooks might be a resource that might be useful to you. Talk with your librarians at your schools, if you have one, to see what resources for audiobooks you might have available for your students, but also the public library is a great source of audiobooks. Audiobooks are also a great recommendation for what we can do if the schools were to shut down again or kids were to lose their access to the public library again, because those audiobooks can be downloaded right from the public library. Connecting with other readers. While every reader doesn't need a community of other readers to talk to all the time in order to maintain their reading attention, for a lot of people, the social aspects of reading feed our reading lives. I feel like I get more enjoyment out of my reading life when I have other readers to talk to. And you may have missed those opportunities to talk to other readers. Kids miss opportunities to talk to each other about books and reading during this time. So what can we do to continue to help our readers remain connected to each other? Young people need lots of opportunities to preview, share, and talk about books, not just the books that they're currently reading, but also the books that they might read in the future. Last but not least, of course, if you've been around for a while, you're likely familiar with Daniel Penek's The Rights of the Reader. You can still find Daniel Penek's The Rights of the Reader poster free online if you're interested in having one. But one of the rights of the reader, as Daniel Penek reminds us from his work over 30 years ago, is that one of the rights of the reader is that sometimes readers don't read, that there are times when readers don't read that much. Now, we have to walk this in two ways, yes? Recognizing that it's okay if we're not reading very much right now. It doesn't change whether or not we are a reader if we're not reading today. It also helps us as mentoring young people to help them understand that just because they're not that motivated to read for a period of time, it doesn't mean they're not readers anymore. It doesn't mean that they're engaging in a behavior that indicates they're poor readers, or all readers go through periods where we don't read that much. How can we help our young people overcome those setbacks in their reading lives and continue to see themselves as readers in the future? Now, we know the academic benefits of reading, and those are legion, and they've been listed, and we can go back and look at research for decades. But beyond even its academic advantages, avid reading fosters social comprehension. It's another reason why we want our young people to be engaged with reading. Social comprehension, our ability to interact with each other, our ability to interact with the world, our understanding of the experiences, or at least the appreciation for the experiences of people who do not look or live like us, compassion that can be fostered through books. Now, we often get tied up in that term avid reading, and as if we need to quantify it with a certain number. You're an avid reader if you read this much, if you spend this much time reading, if you read this many books a year. And I think we need to kind of push past that kind of a definition. An avid reader to me, and I imagine to many of you, is simply someone who engages in reading as a leisure pastime, someone who engages in reading for pleasure, who reads at a high volume over a period of time. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to read a certain number of books. It's someone who engages in reading for pleasure beyond what academic and professional requirements would demand. Unfortunately, what we see is that many young people report losing interest in reading for pleasure around the 3rd or 4th grade. The peak years for self-identifying as a person who enjoys reading for pleasure seems to be about the age of 8. And then it drops down after that, and it doesn't come back up again. Scholastic conducts a biannual study titled the Kids and Family Reading Report. They conduct the study in 1 year and they publish the results the next. It's one of the largest studies of its kind. Tens of thousands of American school children ages 6 to 17 and their caregiving adults. Scholastic uses an outside research firm to conduct that study, so their research is clean. And what they have documented in what they call the decline by 9 is the drop off in reading attitudes, reading interest, and the occurrence of reading for pleasure. We can see that students report, or children report, reading books for fun less often. We can see that they report that reading for fun is less important, and that they report lower enjoyment with reading. And this number doesn't rebound as they get older. It continues to go down or even plateau. I often talk to colleagues out in the world, in different places where I've worked, and sometimes, particularly, I will say with educators who might be teaching the secondary grades, and they will express to me that they believe that it is not their responsibility to make our students love reading. It's not my responsibility whether my students love reading or not. I'm supposed to teach them how to become more proficient readers. I don't think those are disparate goals. I think we can actually teach children how to become proficient readers without killing their love of reading in the process. I think that's possible. But also, this information leads me to understand that the lack of reading interest that we might see with our students, the lack of engagement, the lack of joy that we might see in elementary school, only has long-term negative consequences for them as they move up through the grades. What we found is that the lack of reading interest in the younger grades actually makes literacy instruction more difficult for our older students. So engagement is a factor with which we have to be concerned. Beyond the academic need to ensure that our students are competent, confident readers, though, we have to look at what our big vision is. I don't think anyone wants to be the reason that a child doesn't enjoy reading. We don't want to be the reason that a child doesn't have access to the components that they need to become engaged readers. But as Dr. Stephen Wolk charges us, if the experience of doing school destroys children's spirit to learn, their sense of wonder, their curiosity about the world, and their willingness to care for the human condition, have we succeeded as educators, no matter how well our students do on standardized tests? And I think we would all agree we have more. We have a bigger vision for our students and their reading lives than just the limitations of an academic test. I'm not saying those markers don't matter. We know that they do. But we have to look beyond that at what our students' future looks like with reading in it, and what their future looks like when reading isn't in it. if we graduate young people from our schools who hate reading, I don't think that we have been successful, no matter how well they do on standardized tests. Now, individuals can report specific things about reading that make it joyful or engaging for them, but we can look at some components that are sticky, that I think transfer well between a home and an academic setting, that often support the support reading joy. They are the components that lead to reading engagement, that support reading engagement. So let's take a look at them, and we'll look at time, we'll look at access, choice, and hopefully community. And we'll start with time, because that seems to be what we always are lacking when we're trying to ensure that our students have time to read at school every day. I know that many of you have probably seen Disrupting Thinking by Kylene Beers and Bob Probst. You might be familiar with Beers and Probst's other works, such as their Notice and Note books are very popular. I'm citing them as a source of this chart, and there are many such charts like this on the internet. I just happen to know this is the most current one. Shows the direct correlation between minutes of reading and scores on standardized reading tests. And this was taken from Adam's study, but studies like this go all the way back into, I think, Nagy and Herman in the 1980s, and that study's been replicated 5 or 6 times since then with similar results. So what that tells us is this: no matter how much we change the tests, the kids who read the most are always going to outperform the kids who don't read that much. We could also ask any teacher, and they could also give us the same information. But I'm most concerned with that sweet spot of that 10-minute to 20-minute range, right in the middle. We can see 2 minutes a day is going to be an outlier. So is a student who reads more than an hour a day. We know that students need to be reading 20 to 30 minutes a day of engaged reading with comprehension, and they're just not getting it. They're not getting it at school. And because they're not getting it at school, they're not engaged with reading at home at a higher degree. We want our students reading at home. We want them reading at school, but the line between school and home reading has gotten very blurry in a lot of households this year, as students are transferring between in-person, face-to-face schooling and hybrid schooling and online schooling. But what can we do this year to increase our students reading 10 minutes a day? Perhaps that's the question. What can we do to ensure that all of our students are reading 10 minutes more a day than they were reading last year? Is that a commitment that we can make? Beyond just the academic benefits of reading, of course, we can see some physical and mental health benefits of reading. Large-scale study that was conducted by the University of Sussex, looking at things that reduced stress levels and looking at different hobbies, leisure pastimes, and activities and their effect on stress. And what they discovered was that reading for as little as 6 minutes reduces your blood pressure, reduces your pulse rate, reduces the levels of stress hormones in our blood. If our children were reading for no other reason than this reason, this is something that we can get behind. Our students need it. Our children need it. They're stressed too. The world is also demanding of our time with the internet. Now that kids are spending more time on screens at school, everyone's checking in, everyone's crammed together in their homes. 10 minutes a day of reading might be the only time in their own heads our kids get in a day. John Green, the children's and young adult author, speaks to this. I heard him speak to this once. He said, reading gives us a place to be quiet in a world that doesn't give us a place to be quiet. If our students could read for 10 minutes a day just so they had a place to be quiet, we could get behind it as beneficial, even though we know all the other benefits for them. Unfortunately, according to the International Literacy Association's latest survey, 82% of teachers in that survey indicated that they knew that their students should read independently every day for at least 20 minutes. Unfortunately, only 33% of teachers in that survey said they were able to give their students a daily opportunity to read. So the gap between knowing and doing is large. Many teachers report, the majority of teachers report they know their students need to read at school every day, but most of us are not able to provide it to our students. So what is the barrier? And I think some of that may be with individual teachers, but I think some of it is systemic too. If the school schedule doesn't support independent reading time, it's not happening. If we're flooding our students with so much on-screen reading that they have no bandwidth left to read a book independently after school, That's not something that's necessarily within a teacher's control. That's a conversation that we could have at the campus level. Now, we don't have a lot of research on pandemic teaching, on teaching during crisis teaching, or I imagine that action research is being conducted right now by many teachers in our schools. But we can look at some other pieces of research and try to draw some conclusions about things that might concern us now. I think about the research on screen time and how we really need to be looking at it, especially with our youngest students. I'm also looking at the research on homework. And we know that for the homework studies in general indicate that in elementary school, homework is an ineffective practice, and it doesn't do much more for children at the secondary level. But teachers underestimate how much homework we do assign by as much as 50%. So if we are sitting at home, if we're sitting writing lesson plans and we're estimating how long a homework assignment will take the average student in our class to complete, we're underestimating it by 50%, it seems. Now imagine if we're underestimating it by 50%, the science teacher is underestimating it by 50%, the math teacher is underestimating it by 50%. How much screen time / homework are our students being asked to do in a day? And we know as literacy professionals that reading a book independently often falls to the bottom of the list on the homework list, because parents are looking at the math worksheet and they understand that their child has to fill out the computations on that math worksheet before that work is complete. It's more abstract for a parent or a caregiver to understand why their child reading The Watsons Go to Birmingham or Dog Man is helping them get academically down the road. So the question to discuss around time with our colleagues is this one: how can we streamline assigned reading and screen time across the school day so that we can ensure that all of our students have enough cognitive energy and time for independent reading? If we know the independent reading time is important, how can we hold some time sacred in their lives where they're not sitting in front of a screen, where they're not being asked to do extensive reading for a course? Without that opportunity, access, choice, other things fall away if students don't have sufficient time and mental energy left to read. Now, access would be the next brick in the road, I suppose, not that these are done in any linear way, but without time and access, other pieces become more challenging. Access, of course, means various things. Access means we have the physical books on hand for children to read. Access also means that every child can find something that's accessible to them. So whether that's intellectual access, social access, cultural access. The information up on the screen was taken from a study that was conducted by the University of Nevada, Reno. It was done through their sociology department. It was one of the largest studies of its kind. 20 years of data collection, 27 countries around the world, over 70,000 case studies. And what they were looking for in this study were markers of educational attainment. What keeps people in school longer? They had predictions going into this study. They thought socioeconomic status might be a factor. They thought the educational level of caregivers and parents might be a factor. But what Reno found globally was that even over socioeconomic factors, even over the educational level of caregivers and parents, and even over any formal schooling that children received, access to books was a big game changer for kids. Kids who grew up with access to about 500 books over the course of their childhoods stayed in school 3.2 years longer than kids who did not have that access. They could see the correlation there. Now, 3.2 years, that was the global average. For children in poverty in the United States, it was 3.7 years difference. Now, 500 books sounds like a lot when we're trying to get someone to sign a purchase order for them, or when we're looking for a place in our living rooms to stack 500 books for our own children. But we are talking birth to age 18, 500 books. And that is certainly a more manageable number. We have just never equitably provided it to all the children in the United States, and it still matters a great deal. Newman and Solano conducted a 10-year study looking at public library use and access and book access in 2 different communities in Philadelphia. And what they found was that geographic segregation by class, which is often geographic segregation by race, leads to differential book access. And that has a profound impact on students' literacy development. What we want is for our young people to live in a book flood, where they have fingertip access to books, or they have books in the classroom. They have books in the school library. They own a few books at home, and they have meaningful access to the public libraries in our communities. Unfortunately, too many of our children, disproportionately children of color, Indigenous children, and children in poverty in urban and rural communities, live in what is known as a book desert. And if you're familiar with the term medical desert or food desert, then you know what a book desert is. They are often, sadly, in the same communities. Children do not have meaningful, consistent access to books at school. They do not have meaningful, consistent access to books at home. Now, many of our young people were thrown into a de facto book desert overnight in March when schools closed suddenly, when public libraries closed suddenly, when bookstore outlets closed suddenly. But book deserts have existed for a long time systemically, and perhaps heightened conversations around the need to ensure access for our young people will continue long after the pandemic is over. We have students who were thrown into a book desert overnight every year. And when school closes for the summer, many of our young people, schools are the primary source of reading material for them, if not the sole source. So if our school buildings, our school libraries, our classroom collections, our book rooms are the primary or sole source of books for many of the children in our school, they lose that access when school closes for the summer. And so I'm hoping conversations around access as a result of the pandemic will continue to inform conversations in the future. You may not have heard those terms book deserts and book floods before in your own experiences. You may not have heard the labels, but you've seen the conditions. Either your experiences as a child growing up, what was your book access like as a child? What has your book access been like into your adult years? As an educator and a community member, what do you see as the book access for the young people in your classrooms, in your libraries, in your town? How do you see differential book access? If you want to share those experiences in the chat, I encourage you to do so. It's interesting to see, you know, I grew up with a library card. We didn't have a lot of money for books and for extras to buy them, but we had library cards. I recognize that many of my students don't have library cards now. You may feel that way about your students, so please share your experiences. Did you have book access as a child growing up? How has book access changed for you? Many of our communities have lost their bookstores, even our used bookstores, and the pandemic isn't making that better. You may have lost some of those book access opportunities in your community over your lifetime. I know that as a teacher, I used to be really frustrated when my sixth graders would come into my classroom and admit to me they hadn't read a single book for the entire summer. I used to be really frustrated with their parents. Why didn't their parents take them to the public library? The public library is free, as if their families lack some sort of priority setting around the library. I've come to understand that for many of the families that we serve, access to the public library is not so free. For families living paycheck to paycheck or on an hourly wage, the library fine programs and policies of many libraries prevent families from being able to keep their library accounts active or act as a deterrent to many families in the first place. You know, if my two daughters have ever lost a library book, and they have, I'm not happy about paying that $30 library fine, but it doesn't prevent me from putting gas in my car. It doesn't prevent me from paying a bill or buying groceries. We also have families that we serve that may share residences with other families. Families who live in the same rent house or live in the same duplex, or they share a dwelling. Both families might not have a gas bill with their name and address on it to take down to the public library to show proof of residency to get a library card. We also have families that see the public library and all municipal agencies and municipal services as government agencies, and they don't voluntarily walk into a government building, introduce their entire family, and hand out their address. There are also logistical concerns with the library. Where is the library located? How hard is it to get to on foot or by public transportation? What are the hours in the evenings? How accessible is it for working families? What is the outreach through the public library for families whose first home language is not English? These are all concerns, and public libraries are taking this conversation on. And there's many large municipal library systems have worked over the past few years to dismantle their library fine programs. And this is a wave that is happening all across North America. It started with the New York Public Library System a few years ago, announcing an amnesty for everyone 18 years old and younger who had outstanding library fines. The St. Paul Public Library a year or so ago found that it had $250,000 in unpaid library fines that it cost $210,000 to collect. And they decided this was foolish. And they decided to scrap their library fine program and keep their patrons. The Dallas Public Library in my own state announced that they are fine free. The Chicago Public Library announced that it is fine free. And as these larger municipal systems are going fine free or changing their library fine programs, particularly for children, I believe that will trickle down to more of our suburban and rural systems. If you're interested in this wave of fine-free policies across the United States and Canada, you might check out the Urban Library Council's fine-free map, where it lists specific library systems all across the United States and Canada, what their fine-free policy is, whether and what it is specifically, and you can link to it. If you have a local public library that is gone fine-free, you might register your system too. Library fines impact children at school as well, and many of those library fines follow them from grade level to grade level and school to school, preventing kids from checking out books for years. It's worth it to us as community members to scrutinize those programs to determine whether or not they are actually accomplishing what we'd hoped. Every school district I've worked with that's taken a look at their library fine programs has found that the negative impact on their neediest children is far greater than any benefit or perceived benefit of the program. And they have dismantled them every single time. If you need additional resources, you can check out the Fine Free map or reach out to me online and I'll help you if you need to talk to your public libraries as well. In addition to public libraries, we want our students to have increased book ownership at home. We know that having at least a few books of your own influences children's reading identity development. You think about the word reader and how we see ourselves in that word, and how do we see ourselves positively in the word reader, and how do we sometimes see ourselves negatively in the word reader. Think about the reading identity development of a child who owns 12 books of their very own versus a child who owns no books. With the idea that our schools could be opening, closing, bookstores could be opening, closing, what's the best way to ensure that our students have at least a few books to read? Doing everything we can to help them secure public library cards and working in our communities to do book drives, book donation programs, grants, anything we can pull together as a community to increase children's book ownership at home. Who did not get thrown into a book desert overnight in March? All of our children. Our children who have parents who bought them books and put them on the shelves and had the resources to be able to do so. So anything we can do to ensure more book access with all of our students will only benefit them long-term in the summer, and also should schools close again over the next year or so. We know that access also means access to a full-time librarian. Full-time librarians increase students' test scores that close the achievement gap and improve writing skills. Dr. Keith Curry Lance has been the primary researcher along with his teams over the years, looking at the effectiveness of school librarians across North America. Sadly, Dr. Lance's current research is looking at what happens to school libraries when you take the librarians out. I can summarize that research for you. It's not good. It's particularly harmful to English language learners and children in poverty. They seem to be the groups that take the biggest hit when we cut librarians. Our nation's public schools have lost almost 20% of our librarians since the economic downturn in 2008. Fighting to keep our librarians, advocating for our librarians. And if you have a librarian at your school or in your district, don't get complacent. We have to advocate for our librarians or we will lose them. In addition to that library access in the school library, we also want our students to have access to books in the classroom. We know that access to an abundance of books in the classroom results in increased motivation and increased reading achievement. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we have had to necessarily limit our students' book browsing activities, their ability to preview books in the library, their ability to stand side by side in the classroom library, looking at books together with their teacher. I wanted to share a few resources that might help you continue to offer your students some book browsing opportunities in spite of those limitations. Claire Landrigan, many of you might know. Claire is an author. She's a staff developer. She's up in Boston. And Claire has many resources on her website and a great newsletter. But Claire has created a virtual classroom library on her website that is free for you to use. It's leveled, it's organized by topic, it's full of ebooks and other online resources. Claire has also checked out all of the publishers' permissions for reading things online. You don't have to worry about any copyright restrictions on the materials. But in addition to creating this resource and just offering it to all of us, Claire has also created videos for teachers and librarians who would like to make their own virtual classroom libraries or virtual school library platforms. So she's not only given us the resource, she's also taught us how to create one on our own if we would like. Another resource, Pernille Rip, who many of you may follow, particularly if you're a secondary educator. Pernille is a 7th grade teacher in Wisconsin. She's the author of Passionate Readers and also the founder of the Global Read Aloud. Pernille went online about a month or so ago and just asked, I guess in July now, many people share their ideas for how they were book shopping with their students, how they were handling materials during the pandemic, what guidelines they were following. She's updated this post with new information throughout the fall. So if you just need more tips or ideas, or, I'm all about learning from what everyone else is doing in order to get books into kids' hands. Of course, when we talk about physical books, that's not where we stop by looking at books. We also want to ensure that our students have access to the world of ideas, access to the world of the voices of many people. And social and cultural access is another piece. Our children, our students' lives have gotten a lot smaller in 2020. We've lost a lot of field trips, a lot of family vacations, a lot of guest speakers, hands-on science activities. Books remain one of the best ways we have to open up the world to our students. We can crack the door open just a little bit wider through books. They can travel around the world and through time in the pages of a book, and they can meet all of the incredible people that make up our global humanity. I know that many of you are familiar with the term windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors, first coined by Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop in the 1990s, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to read Dr. Sims Bishop's actual words and looking at windows as with the idea behind it being and remaining that our young people need books that offer mirrors that reflect their own experiences, windows that give them a glimpse into the lives of people who have different experiences than they do, and sliding glass doors, those pathways that open up the world of their imaginations and the world of our global family. The media that children consume, books included, may be one of the best ways we have to open up the world to them. You may be familiar with the research that has been conducted for many decades by the Cooperative Children's Book Center through the University of Wisconsin-Madison. The CCBC has been collecting data on the representation of children in children's books since the 1980s. They started by looking at the representation of Black children in children's books. They've now expanded to include many groups. If you are a spreadsheet person, if you enjoy a good spreadsheet, my mom is an accountant, so I appreciate all of you who like a good spreadsheet. I have now planned an afternoon for you because you can go and look at all the data, and it's interesting to see trends over time and to see how it has changed and how it has not. We know that the majority of books published for young people every year feature white main characters. That number is trending down over the past few years, and that's good news. But the single largest increase in the past 3 years has been in the occurrence of non-human characters in the primary roles. About 50% of the books that are published for children every year are picture books, and about half of those feature non-human characters in them. They have talking trucks and talking trees and talking bears in them. You know, I don't know how the United States is going to continue to evolve as a country. I think we're only going to get more diverse as a country. Here's what I know with certainty. Our talking bear population is not going to go up. We still need more books that feature the diversity of our human family. And while trends are ticking upward, we cannot, we have to remain vigilant to ensure that our kids continue to get the books that they need. If you have 15 minutes with a staff, if you're a school leader, if you're a librarian, or if you're running a parent program or family engagement program with caregivers and parents, I would try to share this TED Talk with them this year. It is 15 minutes from Grace Lynn. Grace is an award-winning author and illustrator. Her book, Where the Mountain Meets the Moon, won a Newbery honor about 11 years ago. Her book, Big Moon Cake for Little Star, won a Caldecott honor. Grace grew up in upstate New York. And in this TED Talk, Grace speaks powerfully about growing up Chinese American and never seeing another book with another child who looked like her for her entire childhood, except for the picture book, The Five Chinese Brothers, which is problematic because of its stereotyping and how that affected her as a person. And I had the opportunity to hear Grace speak at a conference in Orlando in the summer of 2019, and she revisited this conversation again. And she said, you know, it took me until I was an adult to realize that all of my white classmates, the only book they ever saw that had anyone in it who looked like me was also The Five Chinese Brothers, and they needed other books too. I think Grace will do more to move hearts and minds around the urgency of this issue than anything that I could say, because Grace is speaking from her own experiences as a child. Remember that you will be able to get all my slides later, so don't panic about this slide, but I follow lots of people on the internet. I think this is, how do we start? Well, who are you following on the internet? Who are you getting book recommendations from? Who are you getting professional development information from around literacy? Who's in your feed, as Chris Lehman says? It's not just about diversifying our bookshelves. It's about who are we following, talking to, and interacting with. I follow a lot of groups, including the American Indian and Children's Literature blog, the Brown Bookshelf. If you're an elementary school teacher, I would visit that website every week. I do already. It's full of endless book recommendations. They have giveaways where you can win books for your classroom, abundant lists. In February, they feature 29 days of Black creators, of Black, Indigenous, and creators of color, a different author or illustrator every day, to just expand your knowledge of who the people are that are writing these great books. We need diverse books. If I were to start anywhere, would probably be the place I would start, because they have a presence, a huge presence on the internet. You can find them no matter what platforms you prefer. They have a Facebook page, they have an Instagram account, they have a Tumblr, they have a Twitter account, they have a website. Right now, We Need Diverse Books has a COVID page up full of resources during the pandemic this year. The top half of that page is resources for authors, for publishers, for illustrators. The bottom half of that page is resources for educators and for families, many of them free resources. Of course, we want our students to have access to time and access to books, because we are proponents of choice. We want young people to have the opportunity to choose some of the books that they read. We know that choice is a powerful motivator for young people. Choice is a motivator in just about every aspect of our lives, and the absence of choice is a demotivator in just about every aspect of our lives. But we're just here to talk about reading, so we will focus on that piece. Without access, choice is a shadow. We can tell a child they can read whatever they want to for home reading. You can read whatever you want. Free choice book. That presumes they own books at home, yes. That presumes that they are able to get on the internet to read that ebook database that they signed up for. But in the schools where I have worked and taught over the past 20 years, I have found many schools that claim to provide children choice for independent reading. But when we dig in, what I often find is that choice is on a continuum. On one side, we say you can read whatever you want as long as it's this level, it's this long, it must be this genre. You can't read a graphic novel. It's not a real book. You're a third grader. You shouldn't be reading picture books anymore. You can't read that book. You read it for your book report last year. Until we tie so many strings to children's reading choices that we only leave them with one choice left, and that's to choose whether they want to read or not. And too many kids are not taking us up on that. On the other end of the continuum, which is no better, we are opening the library doors. Well, back in the day when we used to open the library doors and just invite children in, we will do that again. But back when we used to just open the library doors, fling children into the library and say, be free, choose whatever you want. You don't like to read, you just haven't met the right book yet. You know, when you tell a seventh grader that they haven't met the right book yet, they don't believe us anymore. They have heard that for 8 years of their school careers. Where is this mystical book? Why is it so hard to find? It's like Atlantis. They're not really even sure it exists. So where's the middle ground? Because this isn't enough scaffolding and support. And over here, all choice is too tightly controlled. Well, modeling how readers authentically self-select books is one way we can support our young readers. But working with young people, what I have found is that the more children read, the more successful they are at choosing their own books, and the less children read, the less successful their choices are. Experience feeds that success. So we'll have one last activity that I think we might be able to try that you can use to tap into what your students already know about finding books, but also challenge them to grow. We know that allowing students to self-select their own books results in more involvement and more motivation to read. If you're working with teenagers, I would write down John Guthrie's name, where a lot of our research on engagement has to do with elementary school students, and we need that research too. But Dr. Guthrie and his teams, his researchers, his students have really studied adolescence and the engagement with adolescents. In fact, one of Dr. Guthrie's most well-known works is titled Engaging Adolescents with Reading. And so if you're working with young people, I would also check out his work specifically. So how do readers find books to read? Well, the way that we could start this activity is by modeling it for ourselves. And I think this activity done with students is best done after some book shopping has happened or some book checkouts have happened. So students have already swapped out books, or they have gone to the library, or they have created a list and they're just waiting for their physical book to be delivered. But every child has a book they have recently chosen to read. Now, young people want to share with their classmates and their peers the new books that they've discovered, the books that they want to read. And so we just want to orchestrate an opportunity for them to do that. Open up the Zoom breakout rooms, give them the opportunity to talk with each other about the books that they've chosen to read. Also, ask them to share how they found that book in the first place. So you've just chosen this great book from the library. How did that book get on your radar? How did you find that book in the first place? Out of all the books that were available, what led you to that book? And what interactions did you have with that book that made you want to read it? Now, I would start by modeling that, of course. So I have recently finished Castaway by Naomi Shihab Nye. Naomi Shihab Nye, of course, our Young People's Poet Laureate. She's also a fellow Texan, just like me. An incredible book of poems about the things that we throw away, and not just literally the trash, but also how sometimes we throw people away, how sometimes we throw ideas away. She's an incredible poet. I will read just about anything that she publishes. And when I found out she had a new book, I immediately ordered it. I would say I found out about this book because of its author, because I knew her work. And the minute I saw her name on this book, I didn't really need any other enticement to read it. You may have a book that you have recently read that you selected by the author. Now, we're going to do this activity together for just a moment, and I'm going to open up the chat for you to share. So I want you, and we'll make this as broad as possible so every reader can participate. I want you to think about a book that you have recently finished, a book you are currently reading, or a book you plan to read soon. So I recognize you may not be reading very much right now because of school, but is there a book that you've downloaded to your Kindle, taken a picture of in your phone, ordered but you haven't gotten around to reading yet, put on the reserve list at the library? Book you've recently finished, a book you're currently reading, or a book you plan to read soon? Does everyone have a book in their minds? Okay, I want you to share in the chat, if you're willing, the title of that book and how you found it in the first place. Did you hear about it online somewhere? Did you see the author in an interview on TV? Did a friend recommend it to you? Did you browse it? Did you stumble across it on Amazon when you were looking for another book? Were you browsing an online catalog? How did that book get on your how did that book come into your awareness in the first place? Did you interact with the book in any way? Did you flip through it physically or flip through it online and take a look at it, looking at the chapter headings, the illustrations, the index? How did you decide that that was a book that you wanted to read? And I'm going to look at your chat ideas for just a moment. Thank you, Joanne. Yes, NPR. I get quite a few books from NPR. See, Gary, that often happens. We find an author in a different way, and then we just look for them. Meg Medina is another author, Gary, that I would read many of her books too. Hey, Christy, if you like Nick Stone, you might check out, I don't know what age of students you're working with this year, but she has a new Shuri novel. If you have Black Panther fans in your classroom.
Okay, actually, it's funny that you said that because one of my students recently from last year told me that he got the Black Panther and loved it.
Yeah.
So I will definitely check that out.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, all of you who are sharing. Okay, we will go back and we will, thank you. I appreciate all of you for sharing. We will go back and look. Now, I did this activity recently with a group of 8th graders. So I want to share with you the responses from the 8th graders that I found. And I'm just trying to get myself back to my sharing. Here we go. Let's see. There we are. So this is a list from a group of 8th graders. Now just scan that list for a minute. We have authors, we have recommendations. Now the young people in that class are 8th graders. They did not say the word recommendations. They started listing names, the name of their teacher, Miss Johnson, my name, the name of the librarian.
I can't see it. I don't know if anybody else can.
See it? Okay, let me try it again.
Can you see it, people?
You know what? I just unshared it and shared it again. How about that?
That's better.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanh you.
Oh, wait, that's just ways to find books.
So this is the list that I got from 8th graders of all the different ways that they reported they found books to read. The author, of course, just like I had said, recommendations. Sometimes they didn't say the word recommendations. They started listing names, their teacher's name, their librarian's name, my name, their classmates' name, their siblings' names. Because they were 8th graders, many of them were on social media. So they were following authors on Instagram or in some other place. Genre, the cover. We joke about not picking a book by its cover. We all do it. Raise your hand in the chat if you have ever picked a book because it had an enticing cover. And also how many of us have been repelled by a book because of its cover, perhaps less intrigued. Series, either we're following a series or we want to finish one. Illustrator, with elementary school students, we would see Illustrator even higher than we saw it on the middle schoolers list. They were mostly looking at manga and graphic novel artists. TV shows and movies, this worked both ways with young people. They either read the book and then went and watched the TV show or the movie, or it was the reverse. They saw a movie or a TV show and then found out it was from a book and sought the book out. Topic, particularly in nonfiction, that's how students were choosing it, but it might have been historical time period if they were looking for a specific time period or social issue they wanted to read about. Then interacting with the book, opening up the book, flipping through, reading a few pages, skimming it, looking at the chapter headings, the illustrations, the blurb. The blurb is just the word for the jacket copy. I talk with our elementary colleagues often that we need to stop calling that jacket copy on the flap or on the back of a book. We can't call it a summary. It's not a summary. If it was a summary, it would have the resolution of the conflict. It would have how the problem is solved. Summarization we know is already challenging for many of our students. Let's not muddy the definition. But even the youngest children can learn the word blurb. You haven't seen anything cuter than a group of kindergartners walking out of the library after that library lesson, all saying blurb, 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 so they can go home and teach it to their parents. And then awards and lists. And awards and lists with that middle school class, that was really interesting. About half the kids said that if a teacher told them a book had won an award or that it was on a list, made them want to read it. And about half of those middle schoolers in Miss Johnson's class told me that when a teacher says a book wins an award, it makes them more reluctant to read it. I am working with that class again later on this school year, and we are going to read. I want to know more about that. I find that really interesting because I don't think that most teachers would believe that that's the way that kids do it. Now, of course, we would have students share with each other all the ways that they found books to read. We would come back together as a group, make an anchor chart. You could do it in a Padlet. If kid did not have some of these ideas, your list is going to be unique to your class, but you could certainly add to it. And you could seed the ground a little bit if you could see that students had chosen a book for a specific reason, but they didn't mention it. Hey, Susie, I know you're on book 3 of whatever that series is. Do you think we should put series on the list? Just valuing all the readers in the classroom for all the different ways that they find books to read. And then leave this up. Kids can have it in their readers' notebooks as a chart. They could have it on the Padlet. You could have it on an anchor chart virtually or on paper. And then each time students are going to self-select books, revisit this chart. When you're conferring with students, direct them towards specific strategies or resources that you think might help, particularly students who struggle with self-selection. If they're always picking a book by its cover and that's not working for them consistently, they need to branch out and try other ways of previewing that book or searching for books. As adult readers, I imagine we can look at a list like this and see that we have probably used all of these to choose books to read, perhaps in tandem or in combination. A friend recommends a book to us, we go online and read a few pages. We find out that a book wins an award. We ask our friend at the public library if they've heard of it. We pick several of these. Young people often have one way of finding books to read, particularly the less experienced they are as readers. They have one way of finding books to read, and they will use it over and over and over again. I hope that you have gotten a few ideas in our conversation this afternoon. I hope our conversation was validating for some of the things that you are already doing and thinking about your students, but perhaps you got a few ideas to take you down the road. We can never lose sight of the fact that reading pleasure has enormous power. Our children will stick with a book longer when they've chosen it for themselves, when they're engaged with reading it. They will pull out every reading strategy that they're learning to navigate a book that they want to read. When we can pass the power and joy of reading along to our young people, that is a gift that will last long after they leave our classrooms, long after they leave school. I appreciate all of you so much for your time and attention this afternoon. I'm here and I will stay and answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much, everybody. Please, let's give a hand, welcome for Donalyn. Someone wrote, which I've been to a lot of workshops, but this is one of the absolute best. It was There's such a wealth of information, Donalyn, and in such a friendly, wonderful manner. And it's a topic that people just don't talk about enough. And it would solve so many problems. We're open now if you would like. And by the way, I have become a reader during this more than I've ever been before. Actually, I joined the book club, which really helps me select, but I don't always like what they select. But I'm spending more. It is so much fun just to go to Barnes and Noble. I know I'm spending too much money, but it's like it's an adventure. I have some place to go that's not crowded and just has so much in it to pick my book. And then I give them away, to whomever would want them, because when I finish them, they're on the back seat of my car. But the pandemic has made me more of a reader than I actually ever was, which is a surprise to me. Please ask a question if you have it. You just have a wonderful scholar here with just a wealth of such important knowledge. Anybody, if you want to turn on your off your mute and talk to Donalyn, just go ahead, turn it on, Lee. Go ahead.
Hi, so I have a question, or at least some advice. So I teach high school, and I seem to have a philosophical difference with some of the curricular choices in my building. More so the idea that, especially at the high school level, that we need to give them a diet of serious literature. So what advice do you have for that counter argument of no, kids do need to not only choose their books, but also read at their level? Because my fear, and Leslie knows this, is that a lot of the books that my students are assigned to read on the curriculum are not actually at their reading level, and that's causing some of the lack of motivation, lack of engagement, and a lot of like what I've looked at Guthrie's research also, and a lot of what we're seeing. So what advice do you have to combat that?
Okay, first, thank you for caring about the reading lives of our high schoolers. And I'm thanking you as a mom of 2 former high school students. So thank you, because even in my household, my daughters read less for their own pleasure in high school than they did their entire lives. So I appreciate you. I think a hashtag that might be useful to you just to connect with some other secondary educators is the hashtag disrupt text. And Disrupt Text, if you're not familiar, was started by 4 authors of color or educators of color around the country who are all secondary educators: Lorena Herman, Julia Torres, Dr. Kim Parker, Trisha Abarvia. And what they're trying to do is seek to elevate a conversation around the need to dismantle the classic canon that historically teaches books that are over 100 years old, written by dead white men. Then so they are sharing and that's an important part of this conversation too, I think, is where's the relevance, where's the currency? I'm not saying that we don't need to read books that are more classic works, but classic to whom is the question. And how are we making those texts more current and relevant for young people? How engaged do we expect young people to be when they never read anything that has any personal relevance to them? So that's a piece of the conversation. But Disrupt Text, they're sharing resources on a daily basis around this issue, including alternative text. And this is one thing that I have found has been helpful in the schools where I have worked, who are just rigid about not getting rid of specific books and specific grades. For example, everyone in 9th grade must read Romeo and Juliet, and they must read To Kill a Mockingbird, or they cannot graduate and become fully functioning humans. And so what they're doing is it's hard to move people completely from this is how I believe to we're throwing it all away. So what's the middle ground? And what seems to be successful is how are we enhancing that classic with other readings? And this might be what helps you with students too, because background knowledge is a piece on why that text is inaccessible to them, as well as their reading level. And so building their background knowledge with more accessible texts around a historical time period, a historical event, a literary movement, whatever it is you're trying to hang it to, whatever theme, that seems to be a way to expand the circle of what kids are reading, while also recognizing that some of our colleagues are just going to be on the To Kill a Mockingbird train for the rest of their careers. I'm really trying to be respectful also of underneath that is a belief that we are teaching the humanities, and that is part of a literate life. And I don't disagree with that piece. Not recognizing the value of the humanities puts us in a place where reading joy, pleasure as a pastime is not valued. Anyway, I think I may have over answered your question. Lee, did that give you any ideas?
Yeah, I think that middle ground, and I agree. It's not like getting rid of everything, because I mean, I just started Hamlet with my seniors, and I will fight to the death with Hamlet that there is value there. The kids always find value there, but options is really what I'm looking for. Do we have to teach 1984? Are there other options that aren't that are more current, that also might not be just Hunger Games? you know, or finding that middle ground, I think is important. Also, short stories.
Yeah.
There's
quite a few short story anthologies coming out for teenagers in the past couple of years, which is exciting because publishers used to not publish them because they thought short story anthologies for teenagers didn't sell that well. But there's a new one that's called The Phoenix, but we know that's not true. We just need to get them to the right people and we'll get them to the kids. The Phoenix Must Rise is a new one that is all science fiction and fantasy short stories, all written by BIPOC authors. And what I like about a short story collection, especially in the way that you're thinking of using it, is you are using it to enhance that unit that you're doing and providing more relevant text from different lenses. But that short story could also be a jumping off point for independent reading. So let's say the first time I meet Grace Lynn is in a short story that you show me, but then you show me where she is in the library. I've now made that connection. So you're feeding her reading lives after that. There's another one called Fresh Ink. And if anyone in the group knows of a short story anthology that you would like to recommend, throw those in the chat too.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Nice to meet you. Kelly, do we have more questions?
We had someone with their hand raised, but I can't find her. Sharon, do you remember the name? It was Shay had a question.
Oh, wait,
Her name was Shay.
But I don't see her on my.
Here she is.
And there's a Christy also.
I didn't have a question. I was just amening what she was saying.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry to put you on the spot then.
Yeah, sorry about that, Shay.
No, I'll take
I'm glad you're here.
I'll take them. It's 2020. You can send all of them to me that you want.
So my question for you is, I currently teach a 5th grade academically talented class, and they absolutely love to read. And
Yes.
during the pandemic, I got them books. I'm still going to houses, picking up books from last year. And then what happens is they get to 6th grade and they're in kind of like an honors program, but they have to read books at a required Lexile level. And we know that some books, they may have a 900 Lexile level, or our Gratz books are so amazing. And the boys and girls both love all of the Alan Gratz series books, but now they can't read them because they're supposed to be reading a book that has a certain Lexile level. And a lot of those books sometimes are just, the themes may be just too complicated. And yet the books that we have that I've always read with them, they have a lot for the kids, you know, to get out of, like, We Will Always Write Back. You know, so this is like a predicament they have been emailing me about. And they're like, we used to really love reading and we're not really liking it this year because we can't choose what we want. So any ideas?
Well, first, I taught a gifted and talented cluster in 6th grade for 6 years, and I learned so much during that time. But you're right, like, it is hard to keep up with them in their reading lives. It's tricky. Judith Wynn Halstead, who's an expert in gifted education, the way that she approaches this is gifted readers, and all gifted people are not gifted readers. We have to really emphasize that. But a gifted reader is someone who has scored at least 2 years above grade level on a standardized test of reading. At least that's how it's historically been defined. But gifted readers should be reading nonfiction at their reading level measurement, if that is going to be required. But they should be reading fiction at their emotional age. And that means that the protagonist is within just a couple of years of the child. And so we should not have 11-year-olds reading books with 18-year-old protagonists in them because that's their level. It is not developmentally appropriate for them, and it is not. So I have often been able to have a conversation with administrators and caregivers around that issue. There have to be other ways to challenge gifted readers besides just pushing them into harder books. The work that the children are being asked to do is where the complexity can live. The conversations, the response activities, the connections that we're asking them. I think it's pretty easy just to throw a kid into a harder book on a Lexile sheet. You know, that's not really challenging an individual reader. There are some resources that you could share, or if you're trying to get some traction with colleagues around conversations around leveling, that we can share with you. As far as your students are concerned, I understand you're in a tricky spot because you want to respect the teacher that they have right now while also not letting your kids' reading lives die. And so whatever you can do to continue to encourage them to read outside of school, continuing to send them pleasure messages about reading, any book recommendations that you can give them. I mean, I know you're doing all of those things. But there's a Psychology Today article on how reading, and many gifted educators like Psychology Today. So Psychology Today has an article. I'm just trying to think, what resource could I send you that people might read? Okay, so there's a Psychology Today article around the myths around reading level. I'm going to see if we can't find it, and it looks at how reading level isn't consistent from reader to reader, that background knowledge has a part, and it might at least raise some conversations with some colleagues. I know that I probably shouldn't be Googling in the middle of my own presentation. Okay. I know I've tagged it somewhere. So, and if you want it, I bet somebody else does too.
Thank you.
Yes, there it is. 3 minutes about reading level. There we go. If your school has a copy of my book Game Changer that came out a couple years ago, there's a whole chapter on leveling in there too that has some of the same resources in it. There we go. Okay, in the chat. No worries. Thank you.
If
Kelly,
I could just, oh, sorry.
no worries. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I wasn't sure if someone else was going to start. I had a question, and unfortunately, I can't remember the name of this package, but my one friend's daughter was at school. They had some kind of online program, and the daughter could choose different books, and they could be at grade level or above grade level or whatnot. She would get points for choosing these books to read, but she wasn't assessed on the comprehension. So she would get all of these points for grabbing, like, I think she was in 8th grade, and she was grabbing Gone with the Wind. And she would get all of these points. But I said, well, are they assessing your comprehension? Do you understand this? She said, no, we just get extra credit and points for these. I couldn't understand how that could possibly function in her educational life or her literacy if she was just staring at pages and getting a blank reward like that. Does anyone know the name of this? Has anyone been stuck with this program? I don't know if any school, anyone else has had to use that in their school. I wish I could remember the name.
There are several computerized reading management programs. I can't speak to which one she's had based on the description. The ones that I know generally have some sort of computerized assessment that goes with it, that is often the source of any points or credit that children are given for reading them. But and those tests are literal comprehension tests. Now, they are not the deeper, higher level comprehension assessments that we would actually really want for our students. They're often more of the literal comprehension, but that exists in most of those platforms. So I wouldn't be able to speak to which one it is. It sounds like if they were using that sort of a program, that it wasn't fully being used. But I can't speak to it without knowing which one it was. Yeah, Accelerated Reader is one of them, but there's many there are several different ones that schools purchase. I don't want to blame any one program.
Do they tend to work well? I'm sorry, do they tend to serve a purpose well, or do they seem to be just extraneous?
They make a lot of really great they make a lot of really great reports. I don't know. I would have to say you would have to talk about individual teachers and what they're doing. But the research on computer management programs has never shown that they have a long-term impact on students' reading achievement. I mean, and Dr. Morrow can correct me if I'm wrong about that.
Okay, that was my question,
yeah, but I don't know a single research study that's been replicated that has shown that those programs have a long-term impact on students' reading ability. And they probably do a bit to undermine their motivation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
No worries. Oh.
And unless someone still has, well, we would like to keep you here forever because you're such a wonderful wealth of knowledge and in an area, again, that is just not talked about enough and needs to be written about more. can't thank you enough of being with us and spending a lot of extra time. You can tell that you were loved by everybody who's hanging on and just wants to still see you. I hate to say goodbye, but I guess we're going to have to. People have to eat dinner
Yes.
and get to their kids.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Let's give another round of applause, please, for
Thank you.
and I will have you in person, I promise. You were supposed to be, and you will be again in the future. We have been lucky enough to have you in person in the past. And although you were just wonderful, there's nothing like being in person. I have to say that. I wish you all a wonderful holiday, and I wish you good health and safety, and that we get through this mess as soon as possible. And kids are resilient, more so than we are, and you as teachers are unbelievable in what you're doing. I admire you so much. I have to do like a teeny tiny bit with 1 or 2 courses, and I have more time to plan, but I think you're amazing. And thank you again, and have a lovely evening, and come back and see us. Hello, Eden, how are you? And everybody else that I know, it's so nice to see you all. Thanks for coming. It makes me feel so good. And bye, have a good Thanksgiving. See you in
Bye,
December.
everyone. Thank
Bye,
you.
Donalyn. Just stay for a second, please.
Bye.